Vez read the mission description again and realized that he had missed an important detail. His instructions were to sell mechs of his own creation. That meant that he could create a new model instead of trying to find 100 people who were foolish enough to buy his awkward Fantasia II RE. He had time to experiment with different designs. It would still be a challenge, though. He imagined that experienced designers would have no problem selling 100 models in a month, but he had neither their experience nor their connections. He also knew that he wouldn't be able to build 100 models by hand. Once he came up with the design, he would pay Iron Spirit to manufacture it. The game made it easy for designers to automate production as long as they had made at least one model themselves in the virtual workshop. There were major disadvantages to using the automation service, though. The BSBH Corporation didn't want the mech market to be dominated by a small number of professional producers. So, production costs were twice as high, and the quality of the finished mechs took a substantial hit. Vess wasn't too concerned about quality, since pilots looking for lower-tiered mechs didn't have too many expectations. But he did need to make sure that his design was still worth buying when it went into mass production. His model would have to offer at least one substantial advantage over the competition. He would need help to meet the tight deadline. The bright credits and design points he had earned from his tutorials would help him a lot if he spent them wisely. The chance to win a production license for a real mech motivated him. Licenses for outdated models were reasonable, but there were few buyers for older models. Licenses for current models were much more expensive. Some of them cost tens of millions of bright credits. If the system gave him a license, he could cut his own costs substantially. The license would be chosen randomly, though. He hadn't had much luck with the system, and he knew that there was a chance that it would give him a license for a worthless model. Designs that were over 100 years old were obsolete and largely useless in battles. Some mech designers refurbished classic models and gave them modern materials and technology, but their designs only appealed to a niche market. He knew that he could also end up with a license for a high-end model whose materials were so expensive and exotic that his small, second-hand 3D printer wouldn't be able to handle them. Getting such a license could even turn some top players against him if they wondered why a new designer had been issued an expensive license. He shook his head to clear his thoughts. Lucky started purring, so he turned to the cat and smiled. First things first, I have 1,000 design points to spend. That's not much for an experienced designer, but I'll make the most of what I've got. They're not doing any good just sitting there, so I might as well spend them. He knew he had to spend his points carefully. Completing the second mission had helped, but he couldn't always count on earning 1,000 points for everything that he did. He had only earned one design point for completing his design. Designing and selling his first mech had helped him assess his own skill level. He had a good idea of how his strengths and weaknesses compared to other new designers who were trying to sell their work through Iron Spirit. He checked his status. Name: Vez Larkinson. Profession: novice mech designer. Specializations: none. Design points: 1,012. Attributes: strength 0.6, dexterity 0.7, endurance 0.6, intelligence 1.2, creativity 0.3, concentration 1, neural aptitude F. Skills: assembly, novice. Business, apprentice. Computer science, lacks competence. Mathematics, lacks competence. Mechanics, apprentice. Metallurgy, apprentice. Physics, novice. Evaluation, unskilled, but on the right track. His status had hardly changed since the last time he had checked it. The only thing that had changed was his concentration, and it had only increased by 1/10 of a point. He knew that he could improve on his own if he worked hard, but he could also buy help from the system. Instead of spending his points on new equipment or pets, he decided to spend them on his own development. He looked through the available attributes and skills and came up with a plan. His attributes formed the foundation of his plan. They weren't all equally useful, but he knew that intelligence, concentration, and creativity could have major impacts on his future. His creativity in particular was deficient. He cringed as he thought of some of the drawings and sketches that he had attempted. As much as he wanted to improve his 3 core attributes, though, he knew that they were so vague that he wouldn't likely see any immediate benefits. He wanted to see fast and tangible improvements, so he changed his focus to his skills. Developing his skill tree would produce immediate results. He could work on practical sub-skills like using his 3D printer or balancing a mech's weight distribution. He would need those sub-skills before he could unlock the fancier and higher-level skills. And I'll need millions of design points for the higher-level skills too. His design points would be better spent on simple, practical skills. He was spoiled for choice, but he needed to choose wisely. He needed skills that he could use immediately so that he could sell 100 models and earn enough to cover his next interest payment. He also wanted to limit his focus to one area. A 10% improvement in one skill category would look better than a 1% improvement in several different categories. I need to give this some thought. The choices that I make today could affect the rest of my career. He thought about all the top designers who had earned their fame by focusing on a particular area. Raul Mendoza, who is known as the Armorer, excelled at developing and using new armor alloys. His company's mechs had the highest survival rates. Jonathan Rasmussen, who went by Apollo, had only developed one line of mechs. His Sunburst series featured fire attacks that grew more refined with every generation. Sunbursts had started as niche products, but they had become top-of-the-line heat-based mechs. Not everyone chose to specialize. Claire Gramza, the polymath, had one of the most formidable intellects in the universe. She rose to the top of any field that she took an interest in, from physics to computer science. She was a prolific designer, and her mechs incorporated the latest advances in whatever field she was studying at the time. Vez knew that he wasn't capable of imitating the polymath. He would be more likely to succeed if he followed Apollo's and the Armorer's examples, and narrowed his focus. He had always done well with mechanical tasks, which was reflected on his status screen. He looked through the skill tree and picked 4 skills. 3D printing proficiency, 1. 200 design points. Jury rigging, 1. 150 design points. Lightweight armor optimization, 1. 200 design points. Speed tuning, 1. 200 design points. For financial reasons, he decided to focus on light mechs. If he designed heavier mechs, he would be limited to selling them to gamers. The professional and military pilots who used heavy mechs tended to do business with major manufacturers and weren't likely to order their mechs from small, one-person boutiques. Light mechs, whose raw materials and production licenses were cheaper, had less picky customers. Vez knew that he wouldn't run out of potential buyers. He still had some design points to spend, so he bumped his creativity up to 1. He had briefly considered boosting his intelligence, but it was already relatively high, so it would cost more to improve it. He also knew that designing mechs was as much an art as a science. He felt the benefits immediately. New ideas started bouncing around in his mind, and he saw the world differently. When he looked around him, everything looked beautiful. Even Lucky looked cuter. He felt like he was finally seeing the world in color after having only seen it in black and white. He suspected that his lack of creativity had held him back. He checked his updated status. Name, Vez Larkinson. Profession, novice mech designer. Specializations, none. Design points, 12. Attributes, strength, 0.6. Dexterity, 0.7. Endurance, 0.6. Intelligence, 1.2. Creativity, 1. Concentration, 1. Neural aptitude, F. Skills. Assembly, novice, 3D printer proficiency 1. Business, apprentice. Computer science, lacks competence. Mathematics, lacks competence. Mechanics, apprentice, jury rigging 1, speed tuning 1. Metallurgy, apprentice. Physics, novice, lightweight armor optimization 1. Evaluation, likes light mechs. Vez was in such a good mood that he was itching to get started on a new design. He wanted to let his creativity loose. Before he went to the in-game market, though, he pulled up his 2RE variant. He wanted to let Iron Spirit handle the manufacturing. The price of his variant had risen to 3,200 gold. It was still affordable, but it wasn't the best deal on the market. He didn't think anyone would spend so much on his crude design, whose flaws had become more apparent to him since he had boosted his skills. But if anyone wanted to, he wasn't going to complain. He left the price alone, since he didn't care about making a profit. He just wanted it to sell. He was much more interested in turning his attention to his new design. He spent the next few hours looking for components in the market. His new sub-skills helped weed out the useless ones, and his improved creativity helped him imagine unconventional combinations. He was sure that some of the components he was looking at were incompatible with each other, but he hoped that his jury-rigging skill would help him combine them. He ended up buying virtual licenses for several one-star components. Astoria Experimental Flight System, 25,000 bright credits. Fayette, ECM Mark I, 7,000 bright credits. Red Eye Assisted AIM Module, 9,999 bright credits. MTTR Removable Battery Pack, 3,000 bright credits. Parconics Light DMR version 3, 19,999 bright credits. Festive Cloud Generator, 5,000 bright credits. Mirren 21, Ultralight Armor Plating, 10,000 bright credits. As much as it pained Vez to part with half of his recently earned credits, he knew that he needed to invest in his designs. The components that he had chosen performed exceptionally well for their star rating, and their relatively high prices meant that few of his competitors were likely to include them in their own designs. One-star mechs weren't much more than training wheels for new players, so designers didn't often invest very much in them. Vez's goal was to improve his mech's flight, and the components that he had chosen would help. Early mechs like the Fantasias hadn't originally had flight capabilities, since the technology had been fairly limited at the time. The Astoria flight system had been invented 100 years after the introduction of the Fantasias. Its power and flight capacity had been lackluster, and its large wings had been easily damaged. The system had worked, though. Mechs that had used it had been able to fly under normal planetary conditions, which had added a new dimension to battles. Time to get started. Vess looked over his new components, thinking about how to integrate them into a single platform. He opened the system's designer and loaded the Fantasia II RE's base model in his virtual workspace. He spent the next several hours loading his new components and adding them to the II RE's frame. It was tedious work that required thought and care. He couldn't just bolt them on. The Astoria system came first. Its huge, skeletal wings flared out, giving the Fantasia the appearance of a fallen angel. The wings were large enough to cover the Astoria's thrusters and anti-gravity systems, but their size was also a liability. A casual hit could ground his mech. To address that vulnerability, Vess attached the Mirren 21 armor plating to the wings. It was a delicate task, and any mistakes could significantly impact the flight system's efficiency. He spent an entire day trying to get it right. When he was satisfied with his work, he moved on to the Fayette electronic countermeasure. He placed the ECM over the Fantasia's left eye, making sure to align it properly so that its short antenna extended from the mech's ear. The ECM would make it harder for automated and aim-assisted systems to track the Fantasia. It worked particularly well against guided missiles, as long as they were from the same tier. He placed the Red Eye-assisted aim module over the Fantasia's right eye. The gleaming, menacing red lens helped pilots maintain a steady aim once they had acquired their targets. Aim assistance was crucial in low-tiered flying mechs, whose pilots often struggled to maintain their aim if their mechs moved around too much. The module worked well against mechs that weren't equipped with ECMs. All the systems that Vess had purchased drained energy, especially the flight system. They all came with their own energy storage, but since they were one-star parts, they didn't have the same capacity as higher-rated systems. He had purchased disposable battery packs that pilots could eject when they were empty. Vess studied his design carefully, wondering where he could attach the MTTR packs without overburdening the frame. The only place he could fit them was on the mech's waist. After wrapping the vulnerable packs with the Mirren plating to protect them, he attached them. The last thing that he added was an unconventional but potentially useful cloud generator. The festive cloud generator was a cloud curtain specialty that he had seen in action at mech shows. It created colorful patterns in the sky, and he hoped that if he attached it just below the Astoria system, it would help to conceal the Fantasia and its vulnerable wings. With his new components attached, he shifted his attention to weapons, choosing a standard combat knife and the new Harkonix light-designated marksman rifle as the defaults. The DMR was neither a sniper rifle nor an assault rifle, but it still had a generous firing rate, and it fired with precision. It used a lot of energy, so it had to be connected to a power supply. If the Fantasia dropped it, it would be unusable. Vest sat back and looked at his new variant. It looked nothing like the base model. It was much bulkier, and the battery packs on its waist looked like a tool belt. But it also looked like a predator. It could easily stalk its prey. He had enjoyed the challenge of creating a new design, and his boosted creativity and new sub-skills had helped. What should I call you? You hardly look like a Fantasia anymore. Let's call you a Fantasia II RE Seraphim. One last thing before I submit you. I want you to look like you were born in the sky. The last thing that he did was paint the whole frame Cloud Curtain's national colors. When he was done, he submitted his design and waited for the system's evaluation. Design evaluation, Fantasia II RE Seraphim. Variant name, Fantasia II RE Seraphim. Base model, Fantasia II RE. Original manufacturer, Kazaya Armaments. Weight classification, light. Recommended role, aerial marksman. Armor, D. Carrying capacity, F. Aesthetics, A. Endurance, D-. Energy efficiency, D-. Flexibility, C+. Firepower, C. Integrity, F+. Mobility, A-. Spotting, B. X factor, F. Deviance, 44%. Performance improvement, 17%. Overall evaluation. The Fantasia II RE Seraphim features superior aerial performance and long-range firepower. It can outperform its opponents until its energy runs out, which will happen quickly. Its close-range combat abilities are weak, and it is overpriced. It is very attractive. You have received 50 design points for completing an original design with a performance improvement of over 10%. Yes, woohoo! Vez pumped his fist victoriously. He had come up with a custom design that was a significant improvement over the base model. It had cost him far too much to design it, but the expense had been worth it. His Seraphim was in the top tier of customized Fantasias.